Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming to class today. My name is Maddie. I'm a certified holistic nutritionist, and we do these classes about once a month. This class is going to be mostly on hydration today, which is a super important topic that I feel like we often kind of forget about. It's a lot more kind of relevant in the summer when we have nice weather, which hasn't been happening lately. I'm still waiting for the sun to come out up here. I'm up in Mendocino now. Um, and yeah, it's especially more important when you're exercising and just kind of losing fluids. So we'll go through this handout together, and I'd love any questions that come up. And if we have time, I'm going to make a little drink at the end. But yeah, let's get started. This might not take the full time if we don't get a few more people in here asking questions, but we can get through it together. Okay. So summertime hydration. Water is the single greatest substance in the human body, as I'm sure you've heard before, accounting for 50 to 75% of an adult's weight. Every cell, tissue, and organ requires water to function optimally. Recommended daily fluid intake is about 2.5 quarts of water and this can be from liquid and or food. So we're going to talk about that in the handout because sometimes we struggle with getting enough liquids in, remembering to drink water. And we'll also kind of learn that straight water by itself isn't always the most ideal. And just, spicing it up a little bit is always helpful as well. So 1 liter is about equal to 1 quart, just for reference there. So depending on how you measure. Alternatively, divide your body weight in half, and that's about the number of ounces of liquid you need in a day. For example, if you weighed around 140 pounds for this example, dividing that in half would give you 70 ounces. And that's how much you want to shoot for as a minimum. And then just as a visual, there's 32 ounces in a quart. So, at least 2 of those, if not a little bit more. And it can kind of help to visualize that by getting either like one of those quart mason jars or figuring out how many ounces is in your regular water bottle that you use. And then just kind of shooting for that as your number, depending on your body weight and all that. And then someone's asking, does non-caffeinated tea count? Absolutely. And we'll get into that in a minute here. So why do we need water? We hear about this a lot. Obviously, it's very, very important to have enough water, but what's it actually doing for us? For one thing, it helps us regulate our body temperature. We need to be in this certain range of 98.5, and you can go a little bit out on either end. But if you get too far in one direction, you're either going to have a fever or get hypothermia. One thing that I do up here in Northern California is swim in the river, like right near the house. At least like I'd say 4 times a week, probably max. And the river is an estuary, so it's connected to the ocean, and it's ocean degree temperature. So whatever the ocean is typically the temperature that we're swimming in. And sometimes in the winter time, we get down to like 49 degrees, and that really affects your body temperature. I run super cold anyway, so I kind of like get mildly hypothermic every time. And so whenever I get out, I always have hot tea to kind of bring that temperature up. But if you were dehydrated, that could be something that would get even worse. So having adequate fluids is going to help you regulate your body temperature. Same thing in the other direction with being in hot weather and hot areas, you're going to be sweating more, and you need that fluid intake to help get back to normal. Water also carries out waste. So that's something that we're not always thinking about, obviously, but we're always having like these cellular reactions, just living and breathing and constantly processing waste within the body. And that comes out in a couple different forms. Like waste will come out through sweat excretions. So you need fluids for that. It comes out in urine, obviously, and it also comes out in our breath, breathing and respirating. So that's something to think about, kind of interesting. It also transports nutrients. So every time with those cellular reactions, things moving around in the body, you need to have adequate hydration just for that to be working on an optimal level. That's why things like start shutting down in extreme cases when we are dehydrated, like your body just doesn't work the same. Also keeps our mouth, nose, and skin moist. I'm sure we've noticed that when we become dehydrated, things start drying out and feeling pretty uncomfortable. And then ensuring adequate blood volume. That's another thing, like blood pressure will change based on hydration. I don't know if anyone has given blood before, but the last time I went in, and I already just have kind of like low blood pressure anyway, but it's a nice thing to do. You can go and give blood, and so you're helping out, especially if you have kind of like a low, a rare blood type or something that they're low in. But it's also a good way to kind of like generate new blood cells. Like it's kind of funny, like you're giving blood, but then you're stimulating your body to make more. So I think it's kind of a healthy thing to do almost. And the last time I went in though, I was so dehydrated, and I was really trying to be hydrated too. I got coconut water before, and they took my blood, and then like halfway through the needle with the, what do you call it? Like the tube, it just stopped flowing and the bag wasn't filling up. And then it can get coagulated if it sits for too long. So I wasn't able to even donate that blood. They use it for testing or whatever, but that was the last time I went in, and then I got kind of discouraged. So if you ever go to give blood, be sure that you're hydrating, not even the day of, but like the night before. So that's something that I probably should have done. It also regulates electrolytes, and that's one of the more important parts of dehydration, because when we have just straight plain water, you're kind of depleting those electrolytes. And I think we talk about that later on in this handout. But yeah, so fluids and water that's been, kind of spiced up with some of these other things like salt or sugar or lemon juice will be a better option than just this straight water, because it will help with regulating electrolytes and adding in the electrolytes that are getting depleted. And then it also flushes the urinary tract. We kind of mentioned that in the beginning here with carrying out waste. So that's part of that. But you want, when your bladder is filling, you want that to be kind of getting flushed regularly and not having any toxins building up in there in a kind of a concentrated form. So that is important. And then symptoms of dehydration. So how you might know that you were becoming dehydrated. Obviously, increased thirst. They say that by the time you actually are thirsty, you're beyond dehydration. So that's why it's good to keep on it before you even get to the point of being really thirsty. Dry mouth, obviously. Headache. So that's kind of like, your tissues are becoming dehydrated and kind of being affected in that sense. And then dizziness, confusion, difficulty walking. That would be like very, very extreme. Sunken eyes, rapid heart rate, low blood pressure. So again, that's going to be that blood volume type thing, not having enough water volume in your tissues and your blood, and then it's just causing your blood pressure to be that low. And low urine output. So this would be like really extreme cases. Obviously, the first things that we're going to notice as more day-to-day kind of thing would probably just be being thirsty, maybe a little headache, maybe a little dry mouth. And then these other ones would be people who have been deprived of fluids for a while. I don't know, has anyone watched that survival show Alone? I feel like they they kind of get some of these symptoms with like the sunken eyes, the heart rate. And the premise of that show, I've talked about it on here before, but there might be some new people in here. And it's just a small group today, so we can chat about it. But the premise of that show is that these people who are kind of like either self-proclaimed survivalists, or sometimes they're teachers of survival tactics, they go out and the show picks like a location and drops them in the middle of nowhere, basically. And some of them take place on Vancouver Island. Some of them are way up in Canada. The one that I watched most recently was actually in Tasmania, which was kind of funny because there weren't like any predators there or anything they had to worry about in that sense. But the thing about survival is like you have to be looking for these things. You have to be on your hydration. People were getting dehydrated because of electrolyte situations when you're out in the middle of nowhere like that, or even camping. That's something that you might not think of because you're not going to have access to something like salt or even sugar. And so it can be tricky to get these electrolytes just from the land. And so part of the way that show works is that they have these health point checks, and the team will come out and make sure that these people who have been surviving on their own out off the land, catching fish and eating berries and random things, but they'll check and make sure that they aren't past the point of like a medical emergency. And if they get to that point, then they get pulled. And most of the time they do get pulled for something like the rapid heart rate or the extreme low blood pressure. And that's probably partially because of extreme dehydration in a sense, or that lack of electrolytes. So that would be an extreme case. Has anyone seen that show? I'm curious. You can say yes in the comments. And if not, I recommend it. It's pretty entertaining. Okay. So sense of thirst diminishes with age. So that can be something we always talk about in these classes because all of us are aging. Everyone's at a different stage, but we're all heading in the same direction. And so this is something that we do have to be aware of as we get older. Certain things like, sense of thirst does diminish with age. And so then it can be less reliable as an early sign of dehydration. You got to be paying attention to more things like that as we're getting older. And then, so checking your hydration, something called skin turgor can be an indication of hydration status. And this one always kind of makes me laugh because you basically check this by pulling up on the skin on the back of your hand. And the idea is that if you're hydrated, then the skin is like, has some elasticity to it. But again, as we're getting older, all of our skin is getting looser. So just something to check out and see. Might not always be the most reliable way of testing, but it should be, your skin should be returning back to its normal kind of state. And if it stays puckered, then you might be dehydrated. And then another more reliable, obvious way is urine color. So whenever we go to the bathroom, just checking to see your hydration status. If it's colorless or pale, actually this is kind of a typo because you don't want it to be completely colorless. And there is such thing as being overhydrated, which is not usually the case. I think most people really go the other way of not drinking enough fluids, but if your urine is completely clear, then you're probably depleting yourself of electrolytes at that point. So you just want it to be very, very pale yellow. And we've got a few comments here. People have watched bits of the Alone show, a few ads, Naked and Afraid. Yeah, that's a little more sensational, I would say. This is like the legit real deal with the Alone. And the reason why it's called Alone is because they are out there completely by themselves. So there's no camera crew, which makes it even more interesting. And so these people are literally just by themselves in the woods, surviving off the land and having to film and document each part of it. And what they end up struggling with the most, which I think is really interesting and something that I think we're kind of realizing coming out of these 3 years of pandemic life, is how much we need human interaction and socialization. Because a lot of people will be absolutely thriving out there and catching all the things and building an amazing shelter. And in the end, they are wanting to go home just because they can't handle being by themselves for that long. Because sometimes it goes like 2-3 months. So yeah, very interesting social experiment, I would say. So yes, check your pee, make sure that it's not too dark or completely clear. You want to be somewhere in the middle there. And then also, did you know that sometimes when you feel hungry for a snack, you might be thirsty? So sometimes those little wires get crossed in the rain, and when we're feeling like we need something to eat, it's great to just try drinking something first and seeing if that's the answer. And also, we want to keep our major beverage intake to between meal times. So that's another thing that I feel like I learned wrong as a teenager or whatever, as a young adult, is that you don't want to be pounding a bunch of water or fluids with a meal, because it actually diminishes your stomach acid. And we want our stomach acid to be as concentrated as possible when we're eating food, because that's going to help us break down our food and absorb and assimilate our nutrients. So while it's fine to have like a small glass of water or liquids with your meal, you do want to be doing most of your hydration in between meals. So if you didn't learn anything from class, just take that away, because that would be helpful. And then a little bit more on why seniors are more susceptible to dehydration. As we age, we have decreased kidney function, so we're less able to conserve fluid in the first place. Oftentimes, as we age, we're on different forms of medication, which are most often, a lot of them are diuretics, so they're causing that dehydration just as a side effect. That reduced sense of thirst, and then your water content of your body decreases with age. So something I learned in anatomy in college, kind of a while ago now, but one part of the reason why we shrink as we age is that those discs in between our spine, which are filled with fluid, they become a little bit more dehydrated and a little more compacted. And so we're literally shrinking as we age just because those discs are getting smaller. And you can even notice this if you say, like I'm in my mid-30s, but if I measured myself first thing in the morning when I wake up, those discs are going to be a little more plumped up, and I'll probably be taller than if I measured myself at the end of a day. And that's just like compacting down and slowly dehydrating with age. Fun stuff. Okay, so tips on staying hydrated here. Always carry a water bottle with you. This is something I've been really guilty of. Now I do a lot of work in a nursery outside, and so you have to remember, like especially work, something that we're going to be spending most of our time doing in the day. You have to have that water bottle with you. So bringing that with you and then doing the measurement from the beginning of class to figure out like how many of those you should have had by the end of the day is always good. And soon after waking up, start your day with a glass of warm water. The warm part is just because your digestive system is also warm. And so it's not as much of a shock. Whenever we have cold beverages, your body has to work to kind of change it to your internal temperature, which isn't, it's not always a bad thing, but it's going to be more compatible if it's a warm beverage. And then drinking water before, after, and during physical activity. So that's going to be when when we're perspiring the most, sweating, breathing out the moisture, or being outside on a hot day. All those are going to be instances where we're getting a little more dehydrated. And then eating fresh fruits and vegetables. This is one of those things that, it doesn't always have to be in liquid form. There's plenty of fruits and vegetables that contain quite a bit of water. And then caffeinated beverages. I mean, you're still going to get some fluid from that, even something like coffee or caffeinated tea. But they're also going to be a bit of a diuretic. So it's kind of like a win-lose kind of thing. Like, you're going to get some benefits from the liquid, but it's going to make you pee more. So don't just drink all caffeinated, obviously. Drink up to cool down. So when it's hot out, our bodies sweat to help maintain appropriate body temperature. As sweat evaporates from the surface of our skin, it cools us off. And that's how we work. That's how we stay cool. Because of this, it's important to consume more water on hot days to make up for the water lost due to sweating. And sweating alone can increase water loss to about 3 or 4 quarts or liters. So that's pretty significant. And it's hard to even quantify it because, like I said, it's coming out of our pores. We're breathing out the moisture. And so it's not something that we can really see so much unless we're just soaked. And then I threw a little bit in here on acids and bases and pH because I find that interesting. And it's always something to think about when we're thinking about our liquids and what we're drinking. So pH is a measurement of the degree of acidity. Neutral pH is 7, so that would be distilled water. Acids are below 7, so that's going to be urine, saliva, milk, coffee, tomato juice, grapefruit juice, orange juice, soda, lemon, vinegar, stomach acid, HCl, hydrochloric acid. And then bases are above 7, so it's like the scale, if you guys can remember that from science class. And so the bases are human blood, salt water, which I think is interesting. Like, human blood and salt water have a lot in common there. And baking soda, toothpaste, ammonia, bleach. All foods have the ability to alter your body's normal pH. So this is something that we're affecting, like every time we put something in, food-wise or drink-wise. So a poor diet in combination with stress can lead to a more acidic body environment. So a lot of times with these fad diets that we are seeing, or, just anything that comes up as being more on the healthy side, one of the common denominators is going to be that it does promote like a more alkaline body type or body environment. And that's what we want to strive for, because we don't want to have an acidic outcome. That's usually what's going to lead to inflammation. So just some ideas for alkaline forming foods. That's going to be something like buckwheat, most fruit, green herbs like cilantro or parsley, millet and quinoa, bone broth, nuts and seeds that have been soaked and sprouted, hopefully. Seaweed is a great one. Vegetables, especially leafy greens. And then some kind of more acid-forming foods might be bread, beans if they weren't treated properly. So again, if they're soaked or sprouted, they're gonna be on the other side of being more alkaline. Coffee can be acidic forming, milk, dried peas, poultry, rice, and other refined grains, and sugar. So most of these have in common that they do have kind of like high carb, high sugar. And they're not bad foods. They're just something that you maybe would want to combine with some of these more alkaline foods, or, treat them in a way that's going to be processed by the body in an alkaline way. So as a general rule, the higher the mineral content of a food, the more alkaline forming it will be. And that's something that we're seeing on this acid side, is that a lot of these things are either very highly grain fed in the case of like maybe the poultry, or it's something that's highly refined, like just straight sugar, or I should say this milk, it may be like skim milk versus a whole milk or something with a little more mineral content or fat content. Because then we're just getting like the sugar part of it. So some foods, some whole foods like citrus measure acidic, like if you did the test, the dip test, but due to their high mineral content, they actually react as alkaline in the body after you digest them. So that's a little bit kind of funny and confusing, but yeah, so citrus is something that's going to be alkaline as we digest it because of the mineral content. Okay, so let's talk about tap water. The quality of tap water varies widely from system to system. The Natural Resource Defense Council found that although vast numbers of contaminants affect the country's water supply, some are much more common than others. And this is like, it's kind of tricky because tap water is going to be different depending on where you live. Sometimes it's going to be completely acceptable, and sometimes you may want to be filtering it. So some of the things that are common in tap water are lead, and that's just going to be from public water or faucets, pipes. That's something that's kind of often like leftover infrastructure type things. I don't think we use lead pipes anymore. Now it's mostly like plastic, which is a whole nother thing. Microplastics in our body. They're saying that we have a certain amount of microplastics in our blood at all times. And then also pathogens, toxic chemicals like arsenic, radon, or pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and body care products. So this is something like hormones, birth control pills, Prozac, and antibiotics. This isn't something that the treatment plants can typically filter out, so they just kind of stay in the water supply, which is a little concerning. And then, of course, chlorine, which is just part of the disinfectant process. But again, if we can filter it, it's okay. There's a big crow outside. Okay. Yeah, if we can filter that out and not be adding the chlorine in to our regular diet, that's going to be better for us than having it. Just because like the chlorine is going to be affecting the microbiome and kind of killing our bugs off, our good bugs. On the same note, bottled water is not the answer. I really like to see people getting away from buying those massive flats of bottled water, because that's not going to be any cleaner or different than the tap water. Oftentimes it is just tap water in a bottle. And then again, we're creating more plastic and adding more trash to the landfill. So the best option for water is to filter your tap water appropriately using glass or stainless steel water containers. There's things like, Brita filters do a great job. There's Berkey filters. And most tap water, it's not going to take much to filter it. Zorro. Or you can buy like commercial bottled water in glass or cardboard, which is a little more expensive, but I know there's those options out there for when we need to buy water on the go. And then a lot of places also have options for filling up your containers. Like I know at New Leaf, they have those big water filtration things where you just bring in your water jug and pay by the gallon. That's probably the best way to go if you don't have a filtration system at home. So let's talk about sprucing up your water. A lot of times we don't want to have just plain water. So enhancing it with fruits, vegetables, or herbs. Great to add citrus fruits like lemons, limes, or oranges, especially since we know those are going to be causing an alkaline environment, and also adding in electrolytes. Cucumber really spices it up, and mint leaves, those together are a really nice combination. Blackberry and sage, watermelon and rosemary. So just trying these different combinations in the water is kind of fun. Pineapple and cilantro or mint. I think pineapple and mint would be good. And then adding a dash of pomegranate, grape, or cranberry juice to the water just to make it a little more flavorful. Or if you like fizzy, try mineral water, sparkling water, or making your water bubbly at home with one of those, what are they called? Like Soda Stream things. And then getting creative with ice, making flavored ice cubes, if you have time for that, with fresh mint or coffee or fruit or juice or tea. And then someone was asking about tea. Absolutely, tea is a great option, especially when the weather is like this, which is absolutely terrible today. It's not feeling very summery up here. So yeah, getting the tea out. White and green tea contain less caffeine than coffee. And then herbal teas are a great option for something that's completely caffeine free. And then sipping on hot savory liquids like broth or soup is also an option. Soup is one of those things that we kind of forget about that is super hydrating, but also a meal. Snacking on watermelon slices. So that's one of those fruits that's really, really high in water content. And another option is to make fresh fruit popsicles. Best to make your own because the ones in the store typically have a ton of sugar in them. Or just check the sugar content. I know there's some more groovy brands that are probably lower in sugar. And then enjoying things like coconut water. So I feel like we didn't talk that much about electrolytes, but that's going to be one of the things that has a lot of natural electrolytes in it. It does have a bit of sugar in it as well, but it's natural sugar, nothing added. And if you're exercising, then coconut water is kind of like the perfect beverage for electrolyte replenishing. I usually go backpacking once a year, and that's usually really hot weather and you're exercising really hard because you're climbing up a mountain with a big backpack on your back. And that's something that we always have to pay attention to is the electrolytes, because if you're excreting all your electrolytes and then just replacing it with plain water, you can actually feel really sick, like really nauseous. And so I usually will put like a little coconut water in my platypus or water bottle for the first day before we go. Or you can even get like a dehydrated version and add that to water. And there's also electrolyte packets, things like Emergency has a bit of electrolytes in it, and is it Emergency? No, it's Energy is the one that actually has less sugar in it, because there was two different companies. One of them was like an offshoot of the other. And there's another one that I really like called Olaloa. Those are really good for electrolytes. Also Noon, I think, is another good one. But that's not a bad thing to have, like, just on a daily basis. You don't need to be backpacking. You don't need to be exercising a lot. Having a daily electrolyte can make you feel way different. So that's something to try out. Also cactus water, or I think I saw maple water in the grocery store. So that was, I don't even know if that still exists anymore, but that would have some minerals. Trying all these different things is kind of fun, especially when you have resources down there. And then the rest of this handout is recipes. So we have a recipe for a homemade electrolyte drink that you can make really easily with lemon lime juice, a little bit of salt, water, and the sugar part is honey in this case. So you get even more minerals from that than just a straight sugar. That's something you could make pretty much every morning. Would be great to have that to start the day, kind of wake up your system. And then there's a melon matcha refresher. I used to make this all the time in Santa Cruz. It's not quite melon season yet, but you use a small, medium, either watermelon or honeydew. The honeydew makes it look a lot prettier because if you use the watermelon, it just kind of turns into this brown drink. But you just mix that with a teaspoon of matcha powder in the blender, and usually some ice, or serve it over ice, and it's really tasty, like a melon drink. And then there's a strawberry kiwi mojito mocktail, and that's just strawberries, frozen strawberries, mint, crushed ice, and some kiwis or strawberry to garnish. And you kind of make like a slushy out of that in the blender. Cucumber seaweed salad. Cucumber is one of those super high water content foods. So that's a good snack. And seaweed also is really good for electrolytes and just mineral content. So anytime we can incorporate that is a great idea. And then I found a few recipes from somebody called the Minimalist Baker. And these all looked really good. They're kind of lengthy. Like, I don't know if it needed to have this much of a description, but I put it all in here for you. Anyway, but these are good. I've been meaning to make them, but my store that's like the closest here doesn't have any coconut butter, so I have to wait to go to the next town over to get that. But these are like a no-bake mint chocolate brownie bar that you make in the fridge, and then you could keep it in the freezer. And I've done something like this before when I used to work at New Leaf, where you make a brownie layer out of walnuts and dates and cocoa powder. And you just do that in the food processor, pack it into a baking tray, and then you can make a mint layer with, in this case, she used some cashew butter and some coconut butter and some peppermint extract, and then you color it with something green, like either moringa powder or spirulina. Pretty sure I used matcha when I made it, which is going to give it some flavor too, but, or yeah, spirulina makes a really nice green color. And then put some chocolate on top of that. Those look really good. And then another snack idea from the same person are these lemon poppy seed donut holes, which are basically just like a snack ball, but I thought those looked good too. And that would be something that's easy to make in the food processor.